I would like to review the email list application at the end of Chapter 5 because it uses the document object model, and it also emphasizes this concept of form validation, which is very important in the industry. On the right-hand side of my screen, we see an HTML form where it asks for an email address, re-enter the address, first name, and a state code. Notice there are asterisks at the end, meaning they are required fields. And we have a button. If I click this button on the right, I get error messages. If I put some data in the field and then I click the button, that one goes away, but the rest of them stay. This is validation. When you develop an HTML form, there are times when you want to make sure that the field has been filled out, or you might want to make sure that the field has been filled out correctly in the case of matching email addresses. So let's take a look on the left at this code. First, we have our opening form tag and our closing form tag. The ID attribute uniquely identifies the form for JavaScript. Name identifies it for the server if you were sending this information to a PHP script or another server-side technology. So in the early days of JavaScript, we didn't have ID. We used name. The servers will always continue to use name. JavaScript uses ID. Therefore, you may see the values being identical when it comes to IDs and names. The action is the script that the page will be sent to. Since we're not working on the server, this is just a plain HTML page, the method can either be post or get. For every form element here is input, we have a label. The label is needed in HTML5, and for accessibility, it just makes an association with the form element. It has no bearing on the validation. So here type equals text is a text box, ID equals email address 1, name equals email address 1 also. So here again, the ID and name values are the same. Remember, JavaScript uses ID. Underneath, and by the way, these are all inline elements, so they're all on the same line. There's our container with the asterisk, and we're going to write the error message there. Notice on the right-hand side here, the asterisk has disappeared. All right, now traditionally we have learned about doing this using Innerhtml. Innerhtml technically is not part of the document object model, so we will be learning different ways of doing it. Also, even though this span has an ID, all right, sometimes it's more convenient to refer to it by its position in the document. So that's another feature of the document object model, allowing us to access things based on their relationship to each other. All right, so we have 4 blocks for a text box, and then here's our button, input type equals button. So let's take a look at our JavaScript code. Here's our onload event handler. This is the button. When we click the button, we're going to call this function joinList, and we're going to give focus to the first form element. So let me go back here and reload this. All right, focus is that little blinking thing. All right, you generally see this a lot. All right, so let's take a look at the joinList. And so the author of this book, first of all, is using the $ function in order so that we can, rather than using document.getElement by ID all the time, we can access the object using this function. So by merely putting $ in front of the value of the ID, we will be accessing that object. All right, so here's joinList. All right, so here again, he's writing this as an anonymous function. Okay, we have 2 variables, and he's storing the value. So how we retrieve the value from a form element is .value. So and this is for comparing the addresses. All right, and he also is initializing is valid equals true, and we're going to be using that. All right, so when you validate a form, what you generally have is a series of if statements. All right, if the first text box equals nothing, all right, this is nothing in here. So if there is nothing in this first text box, then we're going to give an error message. Where's that error message going to be? All right, this is the ID of that error for the span, right down here. All right, so here's this ID. All right, email address error. All right, but according to the document, now we could have done Innerhtml, but if using the document object model, this is a node. All right, so let's go back up and take a look at what we're doing here. All right, so here's our ID. First child, okay, so the span tag is a node. The first child of the span tag is the text dot node value equals this field is required. All right, so rather than saying dot Innerhtml, this expression pretty much is the same based on the if we're accessing the ID value, get element by ID. All right, so if there is a problem, we're setting is valid equals false. Else, meaning it's right, what we're doing is we're clearing out the error message. Okay, so in the event that, here again, we do it wrong the first time, and then we go back and do it right. So every time we click, we're running this function and we're clearing out the error message. So what we're doing is we're taking that essentially Innerhtml, which is firstChild.node value, and we're clearing it out, we're setting it to nothing. And notice the asterisk is not there anymore. The asterisk is only there when the page loads because you don't need it there anymore. There's something in there. All right, so we do the same thing for email address 2. And then we have an else if. We're checking to see that the two of them are the same. And if not, we do the same thing. We have an error message. And if they are right, the second time around, we clear out the error message. All right, next thing, we're validating the first name. And it's the same sequence. Now, validating the state code is a little bit different, the way he set it up. All right, it's essentially the same way as the rest, but we have another function. If not, state code lookup, state code. All right, so state code lookup is a function, and we're passing it a value, state code. All right, now where is state code? Oh, it's up here. That is the value that the user entered for the state code up here. All right, so supposing I don't have anything in there. Supposing I write XX, it's still going to, invalid. All right, let's take a look at this function. All right, so here's our state code lookup, which is the function we're called. All right, and state code is being passed to it as that the variable that's holding the value that the user entered in that form field. All right, now here we have the states, an array. All right, so in other words, these are the valid states. And what we're doing is we're using to uppercase. Remember, we looked at this because we don't want to worry about how they typed it in. So we're uppercasing it, then comparing it to the values in our array. So here's our loop. We're looping through the array. All right, and if it's one of them, return true, else return false. Now, you might see this return false a lot in form validation. What that does, it stops the progression, and so that the user can go back in and fill things out. So why don't we have return false in our join list function? Well, it has to do with the way the function's written. All right, the way the function is written is we have is valid equals false, is valid equals false. Now, we could have put return false in there. All right, but what we're doing is we're actually showing all the error message at once. If we wanted to show the error message separately, then we could have put return false in after all the statements. At the very end of our join list function, which validates our form, here we have if is valid. And remember, is valid equals false, is valid equals false. All right, so every time they click this button on the left, we're running the function. And remember, the first time around, where's our... there we go. Sorry about that. I couldn't find it. Is valid equals true. All right, so we're setting is valid equals true at the beginning. The only time we're going to be changing it to false is if something is false. So every time we do this and the user keeps on doing it wrong, it's going to return false. Once everything is fixed, it's going to return true. So therefore, if is valid, meaning if it's true, then here we have email form.submit. So the form will be submitted. Here again, in this situation, we are validating everything at once. All right, so, and that's fine. Let me clear this out. Now we'll reload. There we go. Sometimes you might see the validation function written so that one field is validated at a time. So the first time they come to an error, they give you one message, so you go back and fill it in, and then they continue checking. So either way works, and this is also discussed in the beginning of Chapter 6, but the full example is at the end of Chapter 5, and I wanted to explain that because this is very important concepts here. The sample code is for you, available for you on the sample code files.